Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare-related ranting and raving and my attempted question answering. That's what I do here. I attempt to answer a question from a reader, viewer, or listener of either the Ancient Warfare podcast or Ancient Warfare magazine. You can ask me a question, you can send me a postcard, you can send me an email, AWA@ancientwarfare.com will get to us. You can comment on a previous video or podcast and they will wing their way to me. This question today comes from Brie. Hi, Brie. Thank you for your question. Besides communicating orders and psychological warfare, what role and status did trumpeters have in warfare? Did they have sidearms like musicians of early modern warfare? The Gallic carnyx is of particular interest to me in this regard. Okay. Right. So the Gallic carnyx that Brie mentions, is, of course, one that was found or was announced as having been found only in January this year, 2026, in case you're watching this in the future. And so it's the third carnyx found in Britain, but it's the most complete ever found. It's also part of it was another find, which I'll get to in a second, which is kind of a third part to our War Pigs series, which I didn't know was a series, but I'll get to that in a minute. So near Thetford in West Norfolk, there were the carnyx, a boar's head standard, 5 shield bosses, and an iron object of unknown function, dated between 50 BC and 50 AD. Now, the carnyx, of course, is a Celtic war trumpet standing up to 2 meters tall, loud, brassy sound. There's a couple of videos on YouTube of people who've reconstructed them, especially the Thetford carnyx from Scotland is the one that's been reconstructed, but there are other examples that have been found in France, Switzerland, and Scotland. So it's definitely a psychological weapon, but there's also a talismanic quality to your musician in ancient warfare, whether it be Greek, Roman, or Celtic, or other cultures. It's always tricky when you're doing analogous history, but the idea of giving orders with instruments is entirely possible. We know that the aulos in Greek warfare allowed them to stay in step, that the timing and the stamping of their feet went in time with the music. Much less possible with a carnyx as far as we know. So there's a much more, we're not sure what the music was. And most of those reconstructions that I was talking about have single howling notes, which are all about intimidating your enemies when they hear that coming over the moors or the fields or wherever you're fighting. Well, Norfolk, over the Broads, there you go. And of course, there's been a fair bit made about the fact that the Norfolk is the land of the Iceni, and therefore this could relate to Boudica. It's dated 50 BC to 50 AD, so it's sort of 10 years before the Boudica revolt in 61 AD. There's the idea of a rallying cry, and obviously having an instrument that is that tall on the battlefield, it's going to stand out, glinting in the sun when it's polished and sounding. You can rally to it if needed. So there's that sort of aspect to them, as well as a sort of a psychological. Probably these men did have sidearms. We do get the depiction of quite a few of these carnyxes in coinage and in the depictions in sculpture of trapani, the plural of war collections of the enemy fallen. So they're obviously a status item. They're also vulnerable, should I say? That we don't know whether the musicians were armored. Obviously, these are two-handed instruments. They can't really wield a sword or a shield. Probably they had men around them whose job it was to protect them because they were an emblematic sort of part of the pride. And obviously, if you lose the instrument, getting people to rally to you is impossible. So all of those sorts of things. And as I said before, the analogy of drummer boys and flute boys and flags is tricky to avoid, especially with the second part of the find, which is this boar standard. Now, we know that the Celts had boar standards. There's a really interesting co-location of boar military standards across multiple cultural warfares. And so that's problematic. In the East, for instance, we get serpents. Parthians, Persians seems to use serpents, which may become the Draco standard that we find in late Roman cavalry. That may come through the Sarmatians, we're not sure. And, even these Celtic trumpets could be Draco-esque, even though they're boars. Anyway, now, the interesting thing about the boar standard, of course, is that that's very rare to find one, and it's thin sheets of bronze have made it up. But we've got Celtic military standards that use the boar. We think that the reason for that is a symbol of strength, courage, and ferocity, which sort of works with boars. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that you then have Greek associations with the boar, especially the Cremonian sow and the Caledonian boar, roughly contemporary with the voyage of the Argo just before the Trojan War. These are boars and a sow that ravage the land around the cities of these states. I think there's a similarity to Beowulf, that you've got a king summoning warriors and heroes to defeat this boar, and they do so. And then the mother of the boar is also a problem. It's very similar to the Beowulf, but that's me out on a limb. Now, the other thing, of course, is that we have one of the avatars of Vishnu is a boar. Then you've got one of the 5 Roman military standards prior to Marius's reforms is also of a boar. Now, if we take Pliny, Natural History 1610, and also a couple of sections in the De Significatu Verborum of Festus, he talks about the porci effigies, and he says that they're the 5th. Now, that makes me think that they're the last line, so they in fact represent the Triarii. But again, that's me out on a limb. If that's the case, you've got boar military standards representing various important parts of various military cultures. And so there's that issue. You've got this idea of they are a spiritual talisman as well. What we've got in later Roman military history, of course, so Marius gets rid of these other 4 and just keeps the aquila, just keeps the eagle. And so when you've got these other standards that are gotten rid of, why then do they stick around? So later, Legio 10 Fretensis 20 Valeria Victrix both use the boar as their symbol, which is perhaps the idea that it's this ferocity, courage, standing steadfast, all of that sort of thing. But then there's also a sort of a talismanic idea of the significance of which god did the boar represent. And so you've got that in terms of a totemic boar in the Celtic standard, that they're a spiritual emblem associated with protection and warrior identity. And then in is it Quirinus? Yeah, Quirinus is the god that's associated with the boar in Roman military history. So you've got all sorts of things. Of course, in Roman coinage, you get the sow, and especially in the early coinage, the ace signatum, I think they're called. They are a sow rather than a boar, and so it's a bit tricky about, well, are we talking about a sow or a boar? What's the difference between the two? So you've got that. Now, your question, before I get too distracted on myself, did they have sidearms? I would imagine that they did, but probably not for fighting, probably for status and last ditch effort defense. But probably the idea would be that you're getting this person away from danger before they need to pull out their dagger to fend off people who are attacking them. I don't know that the 5 shield bosses that were found with this find are representative of a warrior cluster. Is there a 5-man guard around the standard and the carnyx? We don't know, but that would certainly be something you could suggest from that find. Exactly what the iron object is that we don't know its purpose or function, interesting to speculate. So there's all sorts of really interesting things that are happening there in terms of what this meant on the battlefield. I imagine the status of a carnyx player and a standard bearer, even though we don't have written records of these cultures, we do have these trapani, and we do have them showing these were taken and we get, these boar standards that we see. Interestingly, the size of the one that was found in Thetford is much bigger than the ones that you get depicted in coinage. They're quite small little boars. This is quite a large head. So looking at the photo of them restoring it, the boar's head is about that big. So it's a much bigger standard, and it's just the head. It's not the whole boar, which is what you normally get depicted in these things. Similar to coinage, actually, where very often it's a boar's head that's in the coinage rather than the whole boar. The sows, it tends to be the whole sow. Interesting, very interesting. So hope that answers your question, Brie. And join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare. Thanks. Bye.